Wilmington on Fire is a feature-length documentary that chronicles the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. The massacre was a bloody attack on the African-American community by a heavily armed white mob with the support of the North Carolina Democratic Party on November 10th, 1898, in the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina. At this time, Wilmington was the largest, wealthiest, and most populated city in the state. It's considered one of the only successful examples of a violent overthrow of an existing government and left countless numbers of the African-American community dead and exiled from the city. This event was the springboard for White Supremacy movement and Jim Crow segregation throughout the state of North Carolina and the American South. This incident has barely been mentioned and it's been omitted from most history books. It was not until 2006 that North Carolina General Assembly published a report on it that the tragedy became more known to the public. And so we're really fortunate to be joined by film director and producer Christopher Everett. So Christopher is a communications manager of the Full Frame Documentary Film Festival in Durham, North Carolina. He's a film director, producer, and graphic artist from Laurinburg, North Carolina, and a graduate of King's College in Charlotte, NC, and holds a degree in graphic design. Christopher founded Speller Street Films in 2015 in order to produce and direct the award-winning documentary Wilmington Fire. So this was funded through grassroots marketing efforts, and the film's gone on to win multiple awards and be screened at dozens of film festivals. So at this point, please join me in welcoming director Christopher Everett.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Just from your bio, it says that you're a North Carolinian. Now, I'm a native North Carolinian, and I didn't know about the Wilmington Massacre and coup until last summer of 2020, when I heard an NPR story about it, of all places. And so then I did some research and found your film. So how did you learn about the 1898 coup?
Well, I learned about it in a couple of ways. One, as a kid, growing up in Laurinburg, North Carolina, Laurinburg is about an hour and a half from Wilmington, straight on 74. And so my uncle, he used to live in Wilmington. He lived there for about 5 years. And so as a kid, me and my grandparents, we would go up there like every other week to visit him. And he was an RN and he traveled around a lot, to different hospitals. He would stay in a city maybe 3 to 5 years at a time, then move on to the next. But whenever he would move to a town or a city, he would always, research the local history there. He was like an interesting, he loved history. And so wherever he would move to, he would just see what's going on with the local history. He would check out the museums or any other type of things they had going on. And so he would kind of tell us about the 1898 massacre and some of his research and things like that. But as a kid, I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I'm playing with toys and stuff, man. So as I got older, I did a small documentary project about the Laurinburg Institute. And it's a historical Black boarding and day school of my hometown of Laurinburg, North Carolina. And so I did that about 2008. And so doing that research, talking to the guy who actually runs the school today, his grandparents started the school in 1904. And he was telling me that no one wanted to come to North Carolina in like 1901, 1900. And I was like, okay, what was going on? He said, people just didn't want to come or try to start a school in North Carolina. So just doing that research. And then I saw, things about the 1898 massacre. I said, okay, this is what my uncle was telling me about when I was a kid. And so that kind of made me just do some further research. Also, I had just finished up that short documentary for the Laurinburg Institute. And I said, you know what? I want to try to do a feature-length documentary on this topic. No one has done a documentary on it, a feature-length documentary. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try to take the initiative and try to do it myself. And so that's how I kind of came into this thing, man, and just was able to get together with like-minded individuals. We all wanted to tell the story the best way possible. We all were beginner filmmakers as well. And so we all came together and, in front of the camera and behind the camera to put this together.
When did you begin working on this project? We know that it was released in 2015, but
right. Well, we started, I came up with the whole concept in 2010. And, I came up with the concept, and it took about a year of doing research and figuring out how I want to put this together, getting a crew together. And so if you've seen the film, the last part of the film where you have Larry Thomas, like what you just showed, that clip of the trailer, the ending of the film, that was actually the first thing we shot. And that was like November of 2011. That was the very first thing we shot with Larry when we came to Wilmington to film with him. And so we started November 2011 when we first started shooting, and we shot all the way up to the summer of 2013. And then so I used all my resources, all my savings, unemployment, anything I had to get this thing done. But like I said, it was my first time making a film. I forgot you needed money for post-production. so I was stuck. We shot all this stuff, and I'm like, man, what am I going to do? And so I tried to do a crowdfunding campaign. It was, it wasn't successful. And people were asking me, hey, when is this film going to come out? When is it going to come out? So, I'm making up stuff saying, hey, it's coming. We're just working on some things. But out the blue, an NBA player reaches out to me, David West. He's a retired NBA player. People might know him for the last 2 championship runs of the Golden State Warriors. He was a part of that team, winning 2 titles with them. But he reached out. He had his business manager reach out. They actually wanted to buy a DVD. And I said, man, the film's not done, but when it's done, I'll let you know. He said, well, how much is it going to cost to get this thing made? Because I want a DVD. And so we would chop it up for a couple of months. I still didn't believe it, because I'm like, I know this NBA player isn't taking an interest of what I'm doing from Laurinburg, North Carolina. And so he said, look, man, I know you don't believe me, but I'm David West's business manager. He got you a ticket to come to the game in Charlotte. Laurinburg is about an hour and a half from Charlotte. I drove up, still didn't believe it. Went to the game, got great seats, talking to his manager the whole time. And then after the game, I met him, and it was great. He loved what I was trying to do. He saw that I really just needed the completion funds. Everything was there. I just needed to, an extra boost to get over the finish line. So he gave, he wanted to partner with me to finish it, and the rest is history. And that was actually the summer of 2015. We were able to finish the edit. We were able to be prepared also to premiere it at the coup Festival in Wilmington. And I really wanted to premiere it there in Wilmington because, one, coup is the main festival in Wilmington. And 2, coup happens during the week of the actual anniversary of the massacre. So I knew I would be able to capitalize fully, on promotion and everything. And so even with that, with the premiere, I still didn't know what to expect. I was like, okay, we might get a couple hundred people, but we ended up getting over 600 people to the screening, and plus 400 people on the outside that couldn't get in. And so ever since then, screening nonstop all over the state of North Carolina since then, and all over the country as well, and just been a huge support from everyone.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story of just, someone reaching out, and it's kind of the beauty of the internet. People can find out what you're doing and be worlds apart, and can buy into your vision. And that's really wonderful. And is Mr. West, is he from North Carolina, or is he just?
He's from Garner, actually. He's from North Carolina, from Garner. And he's really, really into African-American history and culture. Anytime, I still talk to him now. He's always telling me about some new book he's read or some new documentary about Black history and culture. So, he was following the film for a couple of years, and I didn't even know. And I tell filmmakers all the time, you'll be surprised who's out there watching. Even with my new projects like Wilmington on Fire Chapter 2, we've gotten celebrities involved. Hillary Burton Morgan from One Tree Hill, even Peyton Reed, the director of the Ant-Man movies from Marvel, he even contributed to this part 2 of Wilmington on Fire. So we're starting to see a lot of people with ties to North Carolina, like Peyton Reed, for example. Many people don't know he's from Raleigh, and he went to UNC Chapel Hill, and he heard about the film and wanted to get involved. Hillary Burton Morgan, she used to film One Tree Hill in Wilmington, lived in Wilmington for like 10 years. So I'm starting to see that the internet has really been a good tool for someone who's not in Hollywood, not in LA. If you create some meaningful and powerful stuff, people will find you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is wonderful. It's great to hear the support that you received from the community for your premiere, and moving forward in your work on the second one. So I just, as we've heard from people in the audience too, the film is just beautifully done. It's incredibly well done from a stylistic standpoint and information and scholarship standpoint. And the graphics and the shot choices are really impressive. So how long have you been making films, and do you have a formal like background in filmmaking, or is this something you kind of learned on the fly?
Learn on the fly, and I'm still learning. But my background was really graphic design, like you read in my bio. I've always was a creative person, loved to draw comics, things like that. So I went to school for graphic arts, graphic design, got into like marketing design, logo creation, stuff like that. So that was my background. Also, back then, I was about 100 pounds lighter. In those days, I was actually doing modeling and acting for a while in North Carolina and did some stuff in New York. And that's when I made the move to Atlanta, Georgia, to try to pursue that even more. Didn't work out. And that's why that's when I said, you know what, I want to start making some films and start producing films. And I just got tired of complaining about what Hollywood wasn't doing. They're not making films about this, and that. I said, you know what, I'm gonna stop the complaining and I'm gonna try to do something. I've got all these connections that I've made. Let's try to put something together. It might not be a big, Hollywood production, but we can still do something, low budget, but still maintain some type of high quality to it and a powerful story as well. And so that's how I kind of got into it. And I'm still learning. I'm constantly learning to this day, and also putting myself around people who have more experience that I can learn from also.
Yeah, that's awesome. It just, the hunger and the passion for it has led to a beautiful, beautiful product. So how did you find your interview subjects? Was it difficult to get people to be willing to do an interview?
Not really. It was like everyone was waiting for this moment to happen. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, no one, it's been quite a few people that have attempted or have talked about doing like a documentary or some type of narrative form of this, but a lot of people never really done it. And, there's a group of filmmakers that did a short narrative. And I think that actually comes on tonight on UNC TV if people want to check it out. I think it's called The Red Cape, and it comes on at 10 o'clock tonight, I think, if people want to check that out. But they did a short narrative. It's like a 30-minute black and white short narrative project around the 1898 massacre. And I remember they were filming that at the time, because they were all film students at UNC Wilmington. But outside of them, no one actually put the effort to try to do something about this topic film-wise. And so when I reached out to people, they were hungry for it. They were ready to jump on it and do it. Like I said, they were waiting for this type of moment to happen. And I'm just glad they just believed in me and wanted to be a part of this. The first person I reached out to was Larry Rennie Thomas, the guy that you saw at the end of the film reading the poem. And it's funny about that scene that we shot. Like I said, that was the first thing we shot. It was his poem. Originally, he was supposed to memorize the poem, which I thought he did, but he didn't. And so he was supposed to, the shot of it was supposed to have been a straight shot of him looking at the camera, reciting the poem, and we were going to cut the archival images in between, but he didn't memorize it. So I'm like, oh snap, what are we going to do? It's messed up my whole plan. So the camera guy and I, we said, okay, let's just shoot it at his mouth. You know what I'm saying? And then make it a surprise at the end. He can say the last line straight on. And so a lot of people don't even know that. They think we actually plan to do that. But those are the things that you have to deal with film. And you have to get creative on the fly sometimes, because things just don't work out and pan out. But it actually worked out for the best, doing it in that way. But Larry was the first person I reached out to, and he connected me with a lot of folks, because he's been on this issue for years, man, since the 70s. And he's wrote about 2 books on it. And so when I reached out to him, he hooked me up with Dr. Lewin Manley, who's the grandson, a direct descendant of Alex Manley, Miss Faye Chaplin, who's the great granddaughter of Thomas Miller. Thomas Miller was one of the wealthiest Black men in Wilmington prior to the massacre happening. And he also hooked me up with Professor Sandy Darity, who has an excellent book out right now about reparations, From Here to Equality. And so Larry is the guy that kind of hooked me up with a lot of these people, because he was already doing this type of work, way before my time, before I was even born. And so he kind of made those introductions. He believed in me, and so did everybody else as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and a wonderful, wonderful subject, and participant in your film. His scenes definitely were really powerful, and just thinking about him telling the story of people hiding in the cemetery,
Yeah.
and you could tell that he's lived with that information for so
Mhm.
long. Um, and so one of the most powerful scenes for me was the story about the mob waiting outside of the church to kill
Mhm.
the minister. And
Mhm.
then you showed images of the bullet holes in the church building. Could you talk about the roles of the churches or the religious community in Wilmington, and kind of how, like, for African Americans, and then also how the churches might have, propped up or pushed on the violent mob of racists that committed the atrocity?
Well, the church and the Black community has always been our staple, in our community. A lot of our colleges were started from the Black church. A lot of our businesses, we got the capital to start businesses after slavery, was from the Black church. And also in Wilmington, a lot of our leaders, the leaders in Wilmington, were a part of the Black churches in there. So the Black church was a major pillar in the Wilmington community. But they were also a target during the whole white supremacy campaign and during the massacre of 1898. And the church you're referring to, Central Baptist, Reverend J. Allen Kirk, he actually has a written account online of that whole experience, where we kind of highlight somewhat with Sonia, who's a member and a historian of that church. And her whole family, her whole lineage is connected to that church and connected to the events of 1898. And so when she was talking about that and just painting that picture of when J. Allen Kirk wrote those words, and them talking about the mob were outside waiting and trying to kill him. And he actually ran and hid with his family, in the swamps, which was combined with the Black cemetery, Pine Forest Cemetery at the time, and had to hide and flee the city as well. And so you had a lot of the churches from the white community that Sunday pretty much, and you saw in some of the newspapers and the research, that a lot of the white pastors really praised what happened and pretty much saying that this is God's will and everything is restored back to normal, pretty much back to normal for white supremacy. These Negro officials are out, Black people are back in their place, and now everything can be back to normal. And so you had a lot of that type of push from the white side of things, from the white church as well. So it was a crazy time, man. So if people want to look up Reverend J. Allen Kirk's actual account, I'll find the link and I'll put it in the chat box for everyone to check out.
Great. Yeah, that whole account just really kind of gave me chills. And then when we heard the member of the church telling a story, and then she looks at the camera and asks, "Is like, well, what God are they worshiping? It can't be the same one as us." And it just, it made me think about the church bombing in Birmingham. It made me think about the Mother Emanuel church shooting in South Carolina, and how, these things these cycles, we're living in them. So one point you made in the film, it was a little towards the end that resonated with me, was that the coup is not only about race, it was also about power and money.
Yes.
And was this a theme that you had in mind when entering the project, or is it something that became illuminated through your research?
Oh no, I think that was, I think that was Kent's, that was his opinion. I know a few people have had other opinions as well, but definitely to me, I think first and foremost it had to do with race. I think under that was power and money as well, but I think race kind of still trumped everything. But I think also power and money, had something to do with it also. So I think really they both go hand in hand. I think that it's not one over the other. I think really is race had a lot to do with it, and also had to do with a lot of power and money as well. Because when you look at it, race was definitely a factor. Because if it wasn't, you wouldn't have set up the Jim Crow laws and all these other things that happened after that, and all these different restrictions for African Americans to progress, not only in the city of Wilmington, but throughout the state of North Carolina. But it also dealt with money and power as well, because a lot of these people became extremely wealthy, and they also got heavily involved in politics. They became big philanthropists and ambassadors for the United States government. So it was a lot of things that happened as a result of the 1898 massacre. So I think you have to have it both. It has to be both. It dealt with race and it dealt with power and money as well.
Mm-hmm. And just hearing about the financial fraud that was committed after the coup, where these people were either, you know, and sometimes robbed of their life, robbed of their business, and then their land. And we talk about generational wealth, and you know, that is just robbing the descendants of those families from their inheritance. From
Definitely. And you know, it just didn't happen all, you know, in Wilmington. You know, it happened throughout this country. Even when I was talking to Dr. Lewin Manley about his grandfather, Alex Manley, I know he was telling me, you know, when they left Wilmington, they tried to start another newspaper in New York when they left, and, you know, because they couldn't come back because they were actually trying to kill them. But they tried to start another newspaper in New York, but they just couldn't do it. Like, first of all, it was just hard enough anyway, even back then, to start a business as a Black person. So if you got another shot to try to do it, it probably just is not going to work. So his brother, Frank Manley, ended up moving to Tuskegee and started teaching down there with Booker T. Washington. Alex Manley moved to Philadelphia, and he actually just got into commercial painting and stuff like that, and just raised his family, and just never got into the newspaper business ever again. You know, so you see that type of generational wealth, that he was a prominent businessman in media in Wilmington. He could never pass that down or grow it or build it, you know. So it was a prominent newspaper at the time, where he had advertisement from white businesses and Black businesses, and it was doing well. And so that gets destroyed. Also with Thomas Miller, who we have his great granddaughter in the film. You know, like I said, he was one of the wealthiest Black men in Wilmington prior to the massacre. He had the only pawn shop in town, and he also lent money to white and Black business people as well. And he had a lot of real estate throughout the city also. And so that gets stripped, you know. So really just those two people, you know, we can dissect the real deal losses that they've experienced and how those still affect their families to this day. And not only just the generational wealth that was lost, but just the history that was lost as well. And a lot of these people don't really even know what happened to their ancestors. Like, I know even with Dr. Manley, he said he didn't even find out what happened to his grandparents until he got, you know, later on in life. He said he knew that his grandfather had a newspaper in Wilmington, but he didn't know the reason why they left. He just thought that they just decided to move, and just he didn't want to do it no more. It wasn't until he saw them mention and talk about his grandfather in a book. And then that's when he went to his aunts, who were little girls at the time during the massacre, and he asked them about it. And then they finally opened up and told him about it. And, you know, so that's how he kind of found out. So that's happened a lot, you know, through African-American history, that we really didn't know. And a lot of times we didn't know because they tried to hide it from us, but a lot of times it was just fear, you know, because I know even with Dr. Manley, he talked about how his grandfather and them, when he found out more information from his aunts, that he had bodyguards in Philadelphia, because he just feared for his life that people in Wilmington were going to find him and do something to him. So that's why they didn't really pass that information, you know, down to the next generation.
Yeah, that's tough. And there's the one part where the local historians showing you the letter that someone wrote. It said, "Hey, I have family that's supposed to be in Wilmington. One was a doctor, one was a lawyer, and I haven't heard anything from them since 1898." And how that was just being covered up. And that's, you know, how many people don't know about their family.
And you see that, man, when you look at President McKinley's papers from back then, and President McKinley was the president during that time. And you go online to Library of Congress, he has a huge paper thing on there, and it has different letters that people were writing him during the 1898 massacre and after, saying, "Hey, something's going on in Wilmington. I have family there. I haven't heard from them. I'm hearing that there are riots and all this stuff. Can you please send some help down there?" Because when this happened, it was major news around the country. When you research it, different newspapers all over the country were talking about it. Now, they weren't telling the real story because the people behind it was putting out a certain narrative. You know, they were saying that African Americans started it. They did the first shooting, the first shot. They're doing this. It was 2 people killed. It was 3 people killed. You know, so people knew something was going on to African Americans, but they just didn't know the full spectrum, because the information that was coming out was coming from the people who actually put this whole thing and started this thing. But people were writing to the president, telling them, "Hey, you need to do something in Wilmington. They are just killing Black people at will down there in North Carolina."
Like the community response, right? You said that you had about 1,000 people there for the premiere, but then since then, what's that kind of been like? And then did you have any like pushback when you were filming, or just everyone was excited to tell the story?
Now, the thing is, I didn't have any pushback from people that were involved in the film. And then even with the museums and historical societies, they were all helpful. Because like I said, people have talked about trying to do this for years. And I think a lot of people were like, this is just another person talking about 1898. They're not going to do anything, so we'll let them come in our archive and do what they need to do. And that's it. And I think that's what the thing was with a lot of people. So people didn't bother me at all. I just kind of just slipped under the radar. We did the filming we needed to do. We went home, and I really wouldn't tell nobody when I was in town. And just did what I needed to do and went away, So, but I never expected, in a million years that I would get the love and support. It's been really 98%, 99% all positive from folks. Really appreciate what we've done. And it's changed the city of Wilmington tremendously. And that's why I wanted to do a follow-up to talk about some of that change. Like, I know even one guy, he's actually, he created this big tech hub in Wilmington. And he actually came and saw the film a couple of times. And he was like, man, your film really changed my life. And it's making me want to do more things in the community. And that's what he's been doing. He actually is one of the investors, first major investors of a Black-owned co-working space downtown Wilmington that we've been documenting and filming for Wilmington on Fire 2. It's called Genesis Block. And he's one of the actual startup investors for that, of trying to build more of a Black entrepreneurial class in Wilmington. And so he's been a major contributor to that. So those are some of the small things. Even the Wilmington Police Department uses the film now for their new hires, what I'm saying? So they'll get more of a sense of the history of the town and stuff like that. So the film has been doing a lot of things, and it's been all a grassroots effort of us constantly, pounding the pavement, doing screenings wherever we can, whether they're outside, virtually, wherever over the years. So the film has done a lot for the city of Wilmington, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really beautiful, for it to be this thing that the community can rally around and celebrate this dark time in their history, but to move forward and that it's actually being told, that's being brought to light. So yeah, my last question was just to ask, what's part 2 going to be about?
Yeah, well, Wilmington on Fire Chapter 2 is really going to put the whole story full circle. We know the history. Wilmington on Fire, the first one, lays all that out. But now, what does the future look like? And that's the question that I want to show and answer, hopefully, with Chapter 2. So it's a very different style of film. From the first one, it's mostly talking heads with archival stuff and stuff like that. Chapter 2 is totally different. It's more of an observational verite style of film. So we started off really last summer with the protests that were going on downtown Wilmington with the murder of George Floyd. And so you saw young leadership start to rise out of that. And so we were there from the beginning. We were there, tear gas. I dropped my camera a couple of times. You see that? So it was crazy, man. Police were everywhere and everything. We were in the middle of it with a couple of those run-ins like that. But it starts off with that and shows a young lady who became like a leader of this whole movement, and also what she's been doing since then of doing a lot of community work. They go around like almost every weekend into the community, and like elderly folks who need things done at their house, need groceries brought to them. They do all of those things. And so we've been documenting what she's been doing with her group that started out of this whole protest movement. Also, the Black-owned co-working space, tech incubator that I was telling you about, Genesis Block. We've been documenting their progress, and they finally opened back in January, had their grand opening. And so we were there for that whole process of getting it together, launching it, and now they just started their first minority business accelerator. So we've been documenting a couple of those businesses that are going through that program right now as well. We have another young guy. He's actually creating a mobile Black History tour bus. And so we were there when he first bought the bus, when it wouldn't crank up, see him working on it, getting the artwork on it. And so he's going to be launching the first set of tours in a couple of months, and we're going to be there for that as well. So he's really trying to, show the entrepreneurial spirit that the African-American community has in Wilmington, but also keep that cultural history alive as well, and through the form of a mobile bus tour. And then also he's involved with helping create the first, not the first, but a co-op in the north side of Wilmington, which is predominantly African-American side of Wilmington. So he's helping create that. So we've been documenting those meetings and those initiatives as well. And so also we're bringing Larry Rennie Thomas back. He's going to talk about his push for reparations. That's his whole big thing. So we've been documenting his journey with that. And so it's really focusing on the community's effort to really move the city forward, and really bring it back to that spirit of 1897. That's really what this film is about, because Wilmington became that model for white supremacy with the 1898 massacre. But now we want to show how Wilmington can become the model of showing how people can work together to move us, not only as a city forward, but as a country as well.
That's great work. And it sounds like it's a real, it's a participatory project.
Yeah.
That you're going in there and that you're working with the community, and then that their stories are rising to the front. And so that's really wonderful. I'm just excited to see that, how that project manifests itself in the future. Well, I've talked a lot. Does anyone else in the, any of our guests in the audience have any questions they'd like to ask Chris, or comments?
Well, you asked most of the questions. Yes, questions. But I guess the one that I had was wondering if there were any forces that didn't want your story told, but it sounds like it was a really smooth process that just kind of unfolded for you. So that's wonderful.
Well, it really, I tell filmmakers all the time, there's really no one that can stop you now from telling your story. Like the technology now, as long as you can make it, you can screen it. There's all type of ways you can screen online now, whether it's Vimeo. Like even our film is on Vimeo, it's on Quelle TV, it's on Amazon. We're about to get it on Tubi and Canopy and a few other platforms as well. And this is all grassroots, no distributor attached to it. This is all just work ethic. And also you can screen it wherever too. Like even before COVID, you can screen outside, you can screen at an art gallery. A friend of mine who we've done some events with in New York, we even did something right there on the street corner. He had set up the screen right there. We had about 40 people out there, had the generator. It was cool, so there's no excuse nowadays, of not really showing your work, because you could screen a film in numerous of ways. So really there wasn't no one that could really stop me from making it. It was my own money, and my crew really wasn't from the area either. So no one could really, persuade them not to do it. They wanted to do the same thing, was tell a story. And so we did it, and we're not going to stop.
Could you talk a little bit about, I don't remember his name, but the guy in the ball cap that had the boxes of research? Yeah. Oh my gosh, we were just like so taken with his enthusiasm. Could you talk a little bit about how he got into it and how many years he had spent digging up material?
Well, Kit Chatfield. Yeah, he's independent researcher. He spent many years doing his own research, and he's from Wilmington. The church that we talked about at the beginning, he shared a little story at the beginning of the film, growing up in the church, and then right beside First Baptist Church, there was the Wilmington Light Infantry building. It used to be the Wilmington Library back in the day, like in the 60s, 70s. But now the church owns it. And so he was just talking about, as a kid, they would go there and listen to those stories about 1898. So that's, a lot of folks in the white community in Wilmington, they knew the story because they would be in these social circles, whether it's the church, the other groups they had around town would talk about these things. And so during the time he heard about it was when the Wilmington 10 incident happened, where the whole world was talking about the racial climate in Wilmington. And so the white community was pretty much saying that, well, we need to do something about this, and we need to do what we did in 1898. And so that's when he heard about those things. And, as he got older, he just always had an interest, because I think his ancestor actually fought in the Civil War for the Union. So he always had an interest in this type of history, because it connects to the Civil War in a way, because the people behind the 1898 massacre, all of them fought in the Civil War. They all were Confederate military personnel. So that's where he always would do his research from the Civil War standpoint. And so he always had an interest in that, and it would always tie into 1898. And so that's what led his interest and his intrigue, to it. And he's been nonstop ever since as well. Similar to Larry Thomas, same thing with him. He's been on it, researching it for years from Wilmington. And he always, wanted to tell the story. He actually wrote his thesis about the history of racial violence in Wilmington. And his was about, I think, all the way from the 1800s all the way up until the Wilmington 10 incident in the 70s, and covers everything else in between. So, I think both of those two guys really have spent years, even like I said, even before I was born, on this subject. And I was just happy that they could be a part of it and I could share their knowledge to everyone.
Chris, I have a question. How about the UNC Wilmington? Has the university been supportive of you? Have they been showing this to classes? What kind of connection have you had with them?
Oh yeah, UNC Wilmington has been huge support. We've shown it countless of times there, and they're actually working now. Like a lot of colleges, they have like a film that, like, when freshmen come in, that they have to watch. Well, they're working on it now where when freshmen come in, they have to watch Wilmington on Fire. And so they've been doing a lot of things since we've premiered in 2015 with the film. They've had numerous panel discussions, numerous events around with the film and the history. And it's never been like this before the film. So the film has made a lot of change, and the school has been very supportive. And like I said, they're working on actually implementing when freshmen come in that they have to watch, Wilmington on Fire. So, hats off to them. And I'm glad they've been very supportive, and I know they can't wait for part 2 as well.
Nice to see it go throughout the system a little bit.
Yeah, that's a challenge. That's a whole nother topic right there. But we're gonna continue to try to push it. We're in several schools already. Duke University, UNC Chapel Hill, Greensboro. We're steady trying to push it. But it's going to be a grassroots effort. But we'll get there sooner than later.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. First, being here, and thank you so much for the film. I have a question that's really not about the film, but about you as a storyteller, filmmaker, and an artist.
Yeah.
This country has a very poor history in terms of thinking about questions of truth and reconciliation in so many areas, obviously, not just in terms of questions about Wilmington. But I wonder, as an artist, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, I see those questions also connected to issues of reparations.
Yeah.
What's your view on how these things kind of get talked about? Think about what South Africa did with apartheid, questions of Rwanda, lots of places or in some sense Germany. So I wonder, in terms of the bigger picture, not just in terms of your work here, which is fantastic, but what's your view about that particular subject?
You said the subject of reparations?
Well, reparations and truth and reconciliation. In some sense, truth and reconciliation is what happened in Wilmington, obviously.
Yeah.
It took years and years for that story to be told.
Right.
We tell the whole story about the genocidal activities relating to Native Americans. We've yet to tell the full story of slavery. We're dealing with issues of the whole Southern monuments question. And so that's a lot to dump on you, but I think that who's an artist and a storyteller, that contribution you've made to Wilmington, I think could be blown up and thought about in a much larger way in which we think about questions relating to truth and reconciliation.
Oh, definitely. I totally agree with you. Like I said, I'm going to continue to try to do what I can as much as I can. I definitely think we need more stories on Native American history and culture. I'm not the person to do that. I think it needs to be someone of that lineage and ancestry to do it. But I know with the African-American side of things, I'm gonna continue to do that. And, not only show things like the massacre, but also, I'm working on a project right now about Black martial arts and Black martial artists, about Grandmaster Vic Moore. We're finishing that up right now. So, that's going to be coming next year. Also, I helped executive produce a documentary about the 2 bike weeks that go on in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, the Harley one and also the Black one that goes on during Memorial Weekend. It's mostly about Black Bike Week and the history around that. And so, I can't make every film, but I know I can help certain, filmmakers, especially African-American filmmakers, to get over the hump, because someone was there for me and someone helped me get over the hump. So I try to do the best I can with the resources I can and connections to help others as well who are really grinding and have that same spirit and creativity as I do. And so we can continue to make all these stories in a very diverse and meaningful way to really get the true story of all of this out. And we're starting to see that now more. I think since last year, I know LeBron James, he's producing something on Tulsa. I know Russell Westbrook is. Don Porter is having something as well on the Red Summer that's coming out on National Geographic. So you're starting to see a lot of people trying to cover our history as much as they can, but it's still a lot of work to do, you know, and I'm just going to continue to do what I'm doing. Like I said, we got the martial art project coming. We're also doing a 3-part documentary series on the history of Black builders and architects in North Carolina as well. And so we're just trying to keep this thing moving, man, and do as much as we can to really put the whole story out there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
A story that I wish that some filmmaker would tackle sometime. We happened upon in Chikkama Lighthouse on the Outer Banks.
Mhm.
When North Carolina voted to secede from the Union, Chikkama voted to secede from North Carolina. And when other people may know this, but we didn't. And when the Union troops reached that area, they were astounded to find this group of people saying, "We're not opposed to you. We've been waiting to be rescued."
Right.
So that's a story that I think it just blew us away. It's all in the museum that's contained in the Lighthouse in Chikkama. And there's so many stories out there waiting to be told.
You're right. There are so many stories that need to be told, you know, and it's grateful to have people like Chris that are, you know, dedicating their lives to sharing these stories and telling them in an effective manner.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you. And I tell filmmakers all the time, a lot of people that they're wanting to do something like this. And I tell them, hey, I had no experience at all when I was doing this. You know, I looked at a whole bunch of YouTube videos, got some books, and just started watching documentaries in a different way, though, to see what works, what doesn't work, you know, what kind of fits the style and look what I'm trying to do. And I tell people all the time, you know, you'll be surprised, you know, the history that's out here. Just like they were saying, I didn't even know that. So now you got me. I want to research some stuff after we get off it. But yeah, it's like it's history all around you. You'd be surprised what's in your own family, what's on your own street that you grew up on, your own block. You'll be surprised. Just the interesting and exciting stories that's just all around you. You know, just like where I'm from. Even when I did the thing about the Laurinburg Institute, you know, growing up around there when I was a kid, I didn't realize all the history behind it. But as I got older, I learned to appreciate it, you know, even more. So.
And so where can we follow you, Chris, to make sure that we're up to date on your newest releases and projects you got going on?
Spellerstreet.com. I'll put it in the chat for everyone. You can check me out on there. It has all my social media handles, and also WilmingtonOnFire.com, WilmingtonOnFire.com as well.